Stop scrolling right now because what you are about to read is one of the most emotionally intense stories ever told in this fictional C-drama universe, and if you click away early, you will miss the moment that changes everything between love, loss, and forgiveness. Stay until the end because this is not just a story about betrayal or heartbreak. It is about what happens when someone gives everything to love and still refuses to let go even when the truth hurts deeply, featuring Wu Lei and Zhao Lusi in a fictional emotional narrative that has left fans speechless. It all began during what was supposed to be the most peaceful chapter of their story, a time when everything seemed stable on the surface. They were working on the same project, spending long hours on set, sharing scenes that required deep emotional connection and trust. To everyone watching from the outside, their chemistry looked effortless. Natural conversations, comfortable silence between takes, and emotional scenes that felt too real to be just acting. But behind that surface, cracks were beginning to form. Small misunderstandings that were brushed aside, missed conversations due to busy schedules, and emotional distance that slowly grew without either of them fully realizing it. Then came the moment everything changed. A situation that was misunderstood, miscommunicated, and misinterpreted by people around them. Whispers began spreading on set. Stories got distorted. And trust started to weaken in silence rather than confrontation. Wu Lei began noticing a shift. Zhao Lusi seemed distant in moments where she used to be open. Her responses became shorter. Her focus shifted more toward work than conversation, and the warmth that once defined their interactions felt slightly dimmed. But he said nothing at first, because sometimes love chooses silence over confrontation, and he believed things would return to normal. But they did not. The turning point came during a night shoot that changed everything. The atmosphere was tense due to production delays and emotional scenes being filmed back-to-back without enough rest. In that exhaustion, a misunderstanding escalated. Words were exchanged that were not fully meant the way they sounded. Actions were misread, and assumptions filled the gaps where communication should have been. By the end of that night, something between them had quietly broken. Not loudly, but deeply. In the days that followed, Zhao Lusi became more withdrawn. Not out of anger, but out of confusion and emotional overload. And Wu Lei, despite everything, continued observing her silently, waiting for a moment to understand what went wrong. That moment never came. Instead, what arrived was distance. And distance slowly turned into emotional separation on set. Even their scenes together started feeling heavier than before. Where once there was effortless chemistry, now there was careful restraint. Every interaction felt like both were trying not to step on invisible emotional boundaries. And yet, despite everything, Wu Lei never stopped caring. Even when misunderstandings grew. Even when silence replaced communication. Even when people around them assumed the connection had faded completely. He still looked at her the same way. With patience, with care, and with a kind of emotional hope he never voiced aloud. The real emotional explosion came later, when Zhao Lusi, overwhelmed by pressure and misunderstanding, finally realized the weight of everything that had built up between them. It was not one big betrayal moment, as people whispered. It was a chain of emotional misalignment, exhaustion, and silence that created distance where closeness used to be. And when she finally understood it, she did something unexpected. She chose honesty. Not drama. Not confrontation. But truth. In a quiet private moment away from the set, she reportedly expressed how overwhelmed she had been, how miscommunication had affected her emotionally, and how she never intended for distance to grow between them. Wu Lei listened without interruption. Not because he had no response, but because he understood something important in that moment. That love is not only about closeness. It is also about patience during misunderstanding. What followed was not a dramatic reconciliation, but something quieter, more grounded. A conversation that slowly rebuilt what had been shaken. No loud declarations. No exaggerated emotional scenes. Just understanding slowly replacing confusion. Over time, their dynamic began to shift again on set. Scenes became smoother. Emotional performances felt more natural. And the tension that once existed slowly faded into something softer. Not perfect, but healing. And even though the word betrayal had been thrown around by outside voices, what actually existed between them was far more complex than that. It was a story of misunderstanding, emotional pressure, silence, and the fragile nature of human connection under constant stress. In the end, Wu Lei never stopped caring, and Zhao Lusi never stopped trying to understand what went wrong. And that was what made their story so powerful in this fictional narrative. Because sometimes love does not break loudly. Sometimes it bends under pressure. And sometimes it finds its way back not through grand gestures, but through quiet understanding when everything else finally settles. And that is why this story continues to live in the hearts of fans. Not because it is perfect, but because it feels real in the way only emotional stories can. After the emotional collapse of trust and silence that had formed between Wu Lei and Zhao Lusi, the atmosphere on set remained heavy for several days. What once felt like a natural and effortless connection between them had now turned into something quiet and uncertain. Wu Lei continued working through his scenes with the same professionalism, but those close to him noticed a subtle change. He was more reserved during breaks, more focused during rehearsals, and less expressive than before. It was as if part of his emotional energy had been placed somewhere else, waiting for resolution that had not yet come. At the same time, Zhao Lusi appeared visibly affected by the distance that had formed. Her performances remained strong, but between takes, there was a quietness that replaced her usual warmth. She often stayed slightly apart from the group, processing everything internally rather than expressing it outwardly. Despite the tension, neither of them spoke publicly about what had happened. The silence between them was not loud or dramatic, but it was deeply noticeable to everyone around them. Then came the turning point. It happened late one evening after filming had officially wrapped for the day. Most of the crew had already left, and the set was almost empty, lit only by a few remaining production lights. Wu Lei was still reviewing a final scene when Zhao Lusi quietly remained behind instead of heading back with her team. There was no planned conversation, no arranged meeting, just an unspoken moment where both of them happened to stay in the same space long enough for something to finally break the silence. What followed was not an argument, and not a dramatic confrontation. It was something far more vulnerable. Zhao Lusi reportedly spoke first, her voice calm but emotional. She admitted that the misunderstanding had been heavier on her than she had shown. She explained that pressure, exhaustion, and miscommunication had caused her to retreat emotionally instead of addressing things directly. Wu Lei listened without interrupting. He did not rush to respond. He simply allowed her to speak fully, as if he had been waiting for that honesty all along. When he finally spoke, his response was not about blame. It was about understanding. He acknowledged that silence had created distance between them and that assumptions had filled spaces where communication should have been. For the first time in days, there was no tension in the air. Only clarity. What made the moment powerful was not a dramatic reconciliation, but the simplicity of mutual recognition. Both of them realized that what had been labeled as betrayal was actually a chain reaction of exhaustion, emotional pressure, and unspoken feelings that had never been properly addressed. Over the following days, the shift became visible. Scenes between them began to feel natural again. Emotional sequences flowed, without forced tension. Even simple interactions carried a sense of ease that had been missing before. Crew members noticed it immediately. The energy on set felt lighter, more stable, and more connected. It was not a sudden change, but a gradual return to balance. There were no grand declarations afterward, no public statements, no dramatic resolution scene. Instead, what formed between them was something quieter and more grounded. A renewed understanding. A recognition that real connection is not defined by moments of perfection, but by the ability to recover after misunderstanding. As filming continued, both Wu Lei and Zhao Lusi returned fully to their roles, carrying with them the emotional lessons of what had happened. The distance that once separated them no longer felt present, replaced instead by a mature and steady professional bond. In the end, The story that once looked like betrayal transformed into something more human. Not a perfect love story, and not a broken one either, but a reminder that emotional misalignment does not always mean the end. Sometimes it simply means a pause before understanding returns. And for those watching from the outside, it became a story they would not forget easily, because it reflected something real about relationships under pressure. Not everything breaks. Some things rebuild quietly. And that is exactly what happened here.